If you're the kind of person who loves digging deep into the roots of ideas, really understanding where things come from,
Yeah,
you're going to find this absolutely fascinating.
I think so.
It's all about how those big philosophical concepts travel across cultures and time.
Yeah.
We're diving deep today into the influence of Arabic and Islamic philosophy
Okay.
on Judaic thought. During that really fertile medieval period,
Right.
we're talking roughly 900 to 1500 CE.
A lot going on then.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
To guide us, we're using this incredible entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
A great resource.
It's a really detailed academic overview of how these two worlds interacted.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just some simple translation project.
No.
Jewish thinkers weren't passively absorbing stuff.
Not at all.
They were really grappling with these ideas,
Yeah.
actively engaging with them, building their own philosophies on top of them.
That's the exciting part, right?
Exactly. So today we're going to try to understand who are the key players.
Mm-hmm.
What were the big concepts that were bouncing back and forth?
Okay.
And how did these influences, sometimes in surprising ways,
Yes.
shape the way Jewish thought developed?
I think that's a great goal.
Because this gives us, a totally unique perspective
Yeah.
on how philosophical ideas actually work.
It's not static, is it?
No, it's this vibrant exchange.
Exactly. So first, maybe we should be clear on what we even mean when we say influence.
Right, because
Especially for, a philosopher who wants to be precise.
yeah, it's rarely a simple direct line.
No.
Sometimes a Jewish philosopher might encounter an idea, not even from the original Arabic text, but through like a Hebrew translation
Right.
of a commentary on that text,
Oh.
or even indirectly,
Yeah.
through another Jewish thinker who had already wrestled with that concept.
Someone like Maimonides.
Exactly. Maimonides, huge figure.
Absolutely. His engagement with this was crucial.
Sinful.
And then there's this labeling issue.
Right.
We use Arabic philosophy and Islamic philosophy, but they're not always, a perfect match.
Oh.
There are works that are super important to Islamic thought, but written in Persian.
Oh.
And conversely, Christian thinkers writing in Arabic in the Near East,
Yeah.
all contributing to this big conversation.
Complicates the picture.
Adds a whole other layer, yeah.
It shows that these intellectual traditions,
Right.
they don't fit neatly in boxes.
No, not
They
right.
cross boundaries, languages, religions.
They really do.
And it seems like that really intense period of engagement for Jewish philosophers was mostly with Arabic authors who were writing before around 1200.
That's right. So that's a helpful
Chronological
limit.
Yeah, for our deep dive today.
A starting point for sure.
So with all that nuance in mind,
Yeah.
where do we see these two worlds first starting to connect?
Well, one name pops up early, and that's Al-Kindi,
Al-Kindi.
9th century figure, crucial to those early Neoplatonic ideas in the Arabic world.
Now, for a philosopher listening,
Right.
Neoplatonism, that's like Plato's ideas evolving,
Mm-hmm.
but emphasizing that everything comes from this single ultimate source.
That's a simplification, but yeah, it's the gist.
The single source, this hierarchy of reality.
And this framework, it had a huge impact on early Arabic metaphysics.
So how much did Al-Kindi directly influence Jewish thought?
It's tough to say. At first glance, it seems kind of limited.
Okay.
But those Neoplatonic ideas that he helped spread,
Yeah,
they definitely found their way in.
they got there.
They got there, maybe not directly from his texts, but they influenced the conversation.
We see some hints of early adoption, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jacob Al-Kirkasani, 10th century Karaite Jewish author.
Right.
He's in Mesopotamia.
Exactly, where Al-Kindi had been active a century or so before.
So Al-Kirkasani seems to have picked up some of Al-Kindi's ideas.
Yeah, he incorporates passages from Al-Kindi's work on, sleep and vision
Into his own writing.
into his own discussion on sleep. Yeah.
Wow, so specific.
It is.
It's like you can see the ideas traveling.
Yeah, being applied in a new context.
And Bruno Chiesa, the scholar, he's suggested that Al-Kirkasani's cosmology, particularly his ideas on the cause of tides,
Ebb and flow.
yeah, ebb and flow, that it might come from Al-Kindi's work.
That's fascinating because it shows how even these specific scientific explanations developed in one tradition could then be considered maybe even integrated into another tradition's understanding of how the natural world works.
It's like a puzzle piece fitting in a new puzzle.
Exactly. It's not just the broad strokes. It's the detailed explanations, too.
So Al-Kindi, maybe not a huge direct influence,
Right.
but he sets the stage.
He really does.
But then there's Isaac Israeli.
Oh, you think Israeli. Now, that's a clear case.
He was in Egypt and Tunisia.
Yeah.
Late 9th, early 10th century.
Okay.
His book of definitions. Our source basically says it's like a Jewish adaptation of Al-Kindi's own epistle on definitions.
Which, for a philosopher...
Crucial. Defining your terms.
You got to start there, right?
The foundation of systematic inquiry.
Absolutely.
So Israeli's not just translating.
No, he's taking these definitions of these huge philosophical terms, theological terms too, reshaping them for a Jewish audience.
And adding his own thoughts.
Sometimes little bits of commentary, his own spin.
That's a philosopher at work.
Oh, yeah. He's not just copying. He's integrating these tools into a whole new intellectual project.
He's got his own agenda.
Absolutely. He's trying to do something new.
So it shows us how a Jewish thinker, consciously used these ideas to build his own philosophical system.
And maybe even his theological aims, too.
Right, because it's all connected.
It always is.
And even much later, 13th century, Shem Tov ibn Falakara, in his Balm for Sorrow, he's drawing on Al-Kindi's work on dispelling worry.
On the way of dispelling worry, yeah.
That's such a human concern, worry.
It's timeless, isn't it?
So even these early Arabic thinkers, they're still relevant centuries later.
Absolutely.
Speaking of relevance, or maybe lack thereof.
Oh, you're talking about Al-Razi.
Al-Razi, 9th and early 10th century.
Right, he gets a very different reception.
He's controversial.
That's putting it mildly, especially for someone like Maimonides.
Maimonides really didn't like him.
Not a fan.
What was it about Al-Razi's ideas that was so off-putting?
Well, they called them heterodox, which for a philosopher is like...
a big deal.
Yeah, he's stepping outside the lines.
Of what?
Of the established norms, those Aristotelian and Neoplatonic ideas that were dominant.
In the Islamic world.
Exactly.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, so Al-Razi questioned the idea of creation ex nihilo.
Creation from nothing.
Yeah, he's suggesting there was pre-existing matter.
Oh, that's a big one.
And Maimonides, in his Guide of the Perplexed,
huge book,
really lays into Al-Razi on this.
Oh, wow.
And in a letter to his translator,
Samuel ibn Tibbon.
Yeah, Maimonides calls Al-Razi just a physician.
Oh.
Basically saying he's no philosopher when it comes to divine matters.
That's harsh.
But it shows how much Maimonides valued
Wow.
sound reasoning, philosophical rigor.
Yeah.
He thought Al-Razi's ideas, some of them, that maybe evil outweighs good in the world.
Oh, tough one.
Yeah, deeply problematic for Jewish theology.
So even though Al-Razi was controversial, some Jewish thinkers still engage with these ideas.
They did. It's fascinating.
Like who?
Well, Moses ibn Ezra,
Okay.
in his treatise of the Garden,
Yeah.
actually quotes Al-Razi on motion and points out how Al-Razi's view is different from Aristotle.
He's using him as a counterpoint.
Exactly, to show there are other ways of thinking about it.
In Abu el-Barakat al-Baghdadi.
Yeah, working around the mid-12th century,
Okay.
he took Al-Razi's idea of two types of time.
Two types of time.
The eternal time and created time, and he uses it in his own book.
Wow.
So even this so-called heterodox thinker could offer up these valuable ideas that others built on.
It's like mining for gold.
Yeah, you sift through and find those nuggets.
So influence is messy.
It really is.
It's not black and white.
No, it's all about these complex relationships.
Absolutely.
Speaking of complex, have you heard of the Brethren of Purity?
The Brethren of Purity?
Yeah, it's this huge collection of writings.
From when?
10th or 11th century Arabo-Islamic world.
What kind of stuff?
Everything. Science, philosophy, religion, you name it.
Wow.
Like an encyclopedia of knowledge.
And they influenced Jewish thought?
Surprisingly, yes. And across several centuries.
Oh, wow.
From the 11th all the way to the 15th.
That's a long time.
And across different places, too. Spain, Provence, even Yemen.
So their ideas traveled far.
They did. It shows how a really comprehensive work can attract a wide audience.
So who specifically were they influencing?
Well, there are some possible hints of their influence on big names like Solomon ibn Gabirol and Bahaya ibn Paquada, but the evidence isn't super clear-cut.
Because it's always hard to say.
Yeah, parallel thinking or actual influence.
That's to untangle.
But around 1130, we start seeing clear signs.
Give me an example.
Joseph ibn Zadik in Spain.
Okay.
He writes this book, Book of Microcosm.
What's that about?
Well, it's got all these ideas from the Brethren about cosmology, the natural world, and this big idea of the human being as a microcosm.
Like a mini universe.
Yeah, reflecting the structure of the whole cosmos.
That's an idea that pops up a lot, right?
Yeah, across so many traditions.
It's fascinating.
And this Ibn Sadiq, he even hints that he's using the Brethren.
What does he say?
He talks about studying the writings of the pure philosophers and of the pious scholars.
Which our source says probably refers to the Brethren.
Yeah, and even Maimonides knew about this connection.
Oh, really?
He acknowledged that Ibn Sadiq was drawing on them. So clearly, they were a known presence.
In the intellectual world.
Yeah, people were aware of them.
So Ibn Sadiq, he's one clear case.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's Moses ibn Ezra.
Oh, yeah, his Treatise of the Garden.
This one's packed with references to the Brethren.
Yeah, Paul Fenton, the scholar.
Mm-hmm.
He found tons of passages.
Really?
Directly inspired by them, sometimes word for word.
Wow, that's strong evidence of influence.
It is.
So what topics are we talking about?
Cosmology, the natural world.
Okay.
That microcosm idea again.
Right.
At least 36 passages he found.
That's significant.
It shows how deeply Ibn Ezra engaged with their ideas.
He really dove in.
He did.
And then in 13th century Spain, it seems their influence spreads even further.
It does, sometimes through other writers.
Like intermediaries?
Yeah, other Arab-Islamic authors who'd kind of synthesized the Brethren's doctrines.
Okay, so who are we talking about?
Well, there's Ibn al-Sid al-Batalyasi.
Okay, never heard of him.
He wrote Book of the Gardens.
Another garden book.
It was basically a digest.
Of the Brethren's ideas.
Yeah, a simplified version.
And it was popular with Jewish authors.
Oh yeah, tons of them knew it.
Why so popular?
Well, it existed in Arabic and Hebrew.
So accessible.
Very accessible.
So al-Batalyasi becomes this bridge.
Exactly.
Spreading the Brethren's ideas even further.
That's right. And then you've got Isaac ibn Latif.
Okay.
He was into Kabbalah.
Mystical stuff.
And he picks up on the Brethren's idea of the 5 degrees of the soul.
Huh. Interesting how it all connects.
And then the balance of speculations.
By?
We don't know. Anonymous author.
Okay.
But heavily influenced by the Brethren.
On what?
Numerology, cosmology, natural sciences.
So they're influencing philosophy, mysticism, science.
They really got around.
And, of course, we can't forget about Falaker.
Falaquera, always showing up.
He loved these guys.
He did.
He used their ideas in the Book of Degrees.
Yeah.
The Book of the Seeker.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of topics.
Soul, natural phenomena, moral tales.
He was really into them.
Falaquera was a synthesizer.
Bring it all together.
And their influence wasn't just limited to Spain and Provence.
Oh, where else?
Yemen.
Yemen.
Yeah, these Jewish thinkers influenced by Ismailism.
Now, Ismailism, for our philosopher listener,
right,
that's a branch of Shia Islam.
Exactly.
With some pretty distinct ideas.
Yeah, and these Jewish thinkers in Yemen, they integrated some of the Brethren's cosmology and numerology.
Into their own thought.
Into their own works, yeah.
So the Brethren's ideas, they really traveled far.
Across the Islamic world and into Jewish thought in all these different places.
It's amazing.
It shows how interconnected everything was back then.
Right, and how adaptable these ideas were.
Yeah, they could be molded to fit different contexts.
So from the Brethren, we move on to another big name, right?
Al-Farabi.
Al-Farabi, the second master.
After Aristotle, of course.
Of course.
9th and 10th century. He's got this huge influence.
On Jewish thought.
All over it. Epistemology, logic, metaphysics, ethics, even physics.
And covered it all.
He was a system builder, you know? That must have been appealing.
To Jewish philosophers.
Yeah, trying to make sense of all this knowledge.
So where do we see his influence first?
Well, his book, Enumeration of Sciences.
What's that about?
It's like a map of knowledge.
Okay.
Lays out all the different fields, how they're connected.
Sounds useful.
Extremely influential in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Among Jewish thinkers.
Oh, yeah. They used it to organize their own intellectual pursuits.
Give me an example.
Joseph ben Judah ibn Aqwin.
Okay.
He was a student of Maimonides.
Wow. So top-tier thinker.
He actually takes sections of Enumeration of Sciences and puts them right into his own ethical treatise.
Interesting.
And Falaquera, he does something similar.
Always Falaquera.
He's everywhere.
So Al-Farabi's work, it becomes like
a standard reference.
The go-to guide.
Yeah, for figuring out how all this knowledge fits together.
And then there's Kolonimos ben Kolonimos.
Right, he does a full Hebrew translation
of
Enumeration of Sciences.
So now it's really accessible.
To a wider Jewish audience, yeah.
Spreading the influence.
Absolutely. And Kolonimos, he even adds his own bits.
To the translation.
Yeah, on topics he felt Al-Farabi missed.
Oh, wow. So he's building on it.
Exactly. taking it further.
And Falara, he gets in on the translation action, too.
He does, but he focuses on Al-Farabi's works on Plato and Aristotle.
Summarizing them.
Abridging them, yeah, making them shorter and easier to understand.
So Al-Farabi's influence, it's already looking pretty big.
Oh yeah, foundational.
But what about logic?
Logic is where he really shines.
More so than other areas.
Arguably on par with Averroes.
No, Averroes is like the logic guy.
He is, but Al-Farabi gave him a run for his money.
What makes you say that?
Maimonides himself said that you don't even need to bother with other logic texts.
Besides Al-Farabi's.
That's how highly he regarded him.
Wow, coming from Maimonides, that's huge.
That's as big an endorsement as you can get.
So it's no surprise that Al-Farabi's logic had a massive impact.
Right, Jewish philosophers were all over it.
What about that treatise on the art of logic?
The one sometimes attributed to Maimonides.
Yeah.
It's very likely based on Al-Farabi's system.
So even if Maimonides didn't write it, Al-Farabi's influence is still there.
It permeates the whole discussion of logic.
And it wasn't just that one treatise.
No, nearly all of Al-Farabi's logic works. They were either translated into Hebrew or heavily used by Jewish philosophers.
So we're talking summaries of Isagogy, Aristotle's Organon, commentaries on all of it.
All 6 books of the Organon.
Wow, that's a lot.
It shows how seriously they took his work.
And they weren't just reading it?
No, they were writing their own commentaries on top of it.
Like building this whole intellectual edifice.
Exactly, layer upon layer of interpretation.
And some of Al-Farabi's commentaries are lost, right?
Sadly, yeah, in their original Arabic.
But we can still piece them together
through the quotes
in Jewish philosophical works.
Exactly, they preserved them.
Like an accidental archive.
It's amazing what they saved.
And even Maimonides, he's using Al-Farabi's logic.
In the guide?
Yeah, in his discussion of the eternity of the world.
Wow, that's a huge question.
It is, and he's subtly drawing on Al-Farabi.
To support his argument.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It shows how deeply embedded Al-Farabi's ideas were.
So logic, definitely Al-Farabi's strong suit. But what about his other areas of thought?
Well, his Book of the Opinions of the People of the Virtuous City.
Okay, what's that about?
It's his vision of an ideal society.
A utopia.
Kind of, yeah, society based on philosophical principles.
Interesting. So how did Jewish thinkers respond to that?
It wasn't as central as his logic, but there's definitely interest.
Okay.
We find quotations from it in Moses ibn Ezra, Isaac ibn Latif, and Filiquera incorporates some of it into his discussion of God.
So they're picking and choosing.
Yeah, finding what resonates with their own concerns.
Now, the virtuous city itself wasn't translated into Hebrew, right?
That's right, but the political regimen was...
Okay, so Jewish thinkers had access to that one.
Filiquera quotes it.
Of course he does.
But here's a really interesting point.
Okay.
Shlomo Pines, the scholar, he argues that the virtuous city, even though Maimonides doesn't explicitly cite it, might have been a major influence.
Maimonides.
Yeah, on his understanding of the roles of philosopher and prophet.
Wow, that's a huge theme in Maimonides.
It is, and Pines thinks Al-Farabi was lurking in the background.
An unacknowledged source.
Yeah, shaping Maimonides' thinking.
That's fascinating.
And it wasn't just about philosopher-prophet stuff.
What else?
Al-Farabi's ideas on the relationship between philosophy and religion might have also influenced Maimonides' approach.
So a subtle but significant influence.
Exactly, shaping the way Maimonides integrated those two domains.
That's how intellectual history works, right?
Yeah, it's not always about direct quotes.
It's about these deeper connections.
Sometimes hidden, sometimes revealed.
And then there's European Jewish philosophers in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Right.
They got really interested in Al-Farabi's On the Intellect.
Fascinating work.
What's it about?
The complexities of human understanding.
Okay.
And how our intellect might connect to a higher intellect.
A divine intellect.
That's the idea.
Deep stuff.
Very deep, and apparently Maimonides was into it.
Which is probably why it got so popular.
Yeah, his followers wanted to understand what he was reading.
So they translated On the Intellect.
Multiple translations, circulating widely.
It became a key text.
Absolutely, for grappling with this concept of intellect.
And briefly, what about Al-Farabi's ethics?
Well, you see some early traces of his ideas in Abraham Bar Hia, and then his commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
Lost, right?
Sadly.
But it might have influenced Maimonides?
On individual divine providence, how God interacts with each person.
That's a big one.
And then several of Al-Farabi's ethical works that we do have, they were translated into Hebrew.
So Jewish philosophers had access to them.
And they were quoting him using his ideas.
So his ethical thought had some impact.
It did, though maybe not as much as his logic.
And finally, physics.
He wrote a big commentary on Aristotle's physics.
Also lost, right?
I know, such a shame.
But Phyllocera might be referencing it.
Implicitly, yeah.
And Maimonides mentions it too.
In relation to celestial bodies.
So Al-Farabi, he really was all over the place.
He was. His influence is massive.
He shaped the intellectual world that Jewish philosophers were working in.
He provided the framework, the building blocks.
And then along comes Avicenna.
Avicenna, another giant.
Ibn Sina.
Right, 10th and 11th century.
And he's particularly interesting because
he tried to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Islam.
Right.
Which must have been fascinating for Jewish thinkers.
Because they were trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, integrate philosophy with their own religious traditions.
So how much did Avicenna influence Jewish thought?
A lot. We even talk about Jewish Avicennism.
Like a whole movement.
Yeah, a distinct trend.
And it gets mixed up with Jewish Ghazelism, too.
That's later, but basically both of them were used to defend against the perceived threat of Averroism.
Okay, we'll get to Averroes later.
But within Jewish Avicennism, you have committed Avicennians.
The diehards and eclectic ones.
Picking and choosing.
Exactly.
So his influence was widespread, even if not everyone was totally on board.
Exactly. Some took the whole package, others just certain ideas.
What were some of those ideas that really caught on?
Well, his theory of the 5 internal senses.
What are those?
It's a complex psychological model.
Okay.
But we see hints of it in Bahaya ibn Paquetta.
Early on.
Yeah, though he might have gotten it indirectly.
Through some other text.
Right, not straight from Avicenna.
It shows how these ideas could travel in roundabout ways.
For sure.
And then you have Judah Halevi.
Judah Halevi.
Big name.
In his Book of the Khazar.
Yeah.
He directly uses Avicenna's epistle on the soul.
The nature of the human soul. Pretty fundamental.
So he's drawing on Avicenna pretty explicitly.
He is.
And Abraham ibn Ezra.
Right, he was apparently into Avicenna's mystical work.
The living son of the watchful.
That's the one, an allegorical story.
Interesting.
So Avicenna's influence, it spanned different genres and styles.
He had range.
He did.
But it seems like his broader philosophical influence really takes off after 1150.
That's right.
With Abraham ibn Dawud.
The so-called father of Jewish Aristotelianism.
He leaned heavily on Avicenna.
And Al-Ghazali, too.
In his book, The Exalted Faith.
A foundational work.
So what specifically did he take from Avicenna?
Oh, all sorts of stuff. Categories, matter and form.
Okay.
Motion, the soul, celestial bodies.
The whole shebang.
Pretty much. But here's a thought.
Okay.
Maybe Ibn Dawud and even Maimonides later, they got their Avicenna secondhand.
Through Al-Ghazali.
Yeah, in his Intentions of the Philosopher.
So Al-Ghazali's summarizing and critiquing Avicenna.
And maybe that's how these Jewish thinkers encountered those ideas.
That's a mind bender.
It is. It shows how complex these intellectual lineages can be.
And not always a straight line.
Oop.
So what about Maimonides' own take on Avicenna?
He acknowledged him, called him a subtle thinker, but didn't treat him as a top authority.
Not like Al-Farabi.
Right.
But there are still Avicennian ideas in the